The Gormenghast Trilogy by Mervyn Peake. Book 1. Titus Groan. A Roof of Reeds. To her left, as she moved slowly along the broken and overgrown track, Keda was conscious the while of that blasphemous finger of rock which had dominated the western skyline for 7 weary days. It had been like a presence, something which, however the sunlight or moonlight played upon it, was always sinister, in essence, wicked. Between the path she walked and the range of mountains was a region of marshland which reflected the voluptuous sky in rich pools, or with a duller glow, where choked swamps sucked at the colour and breathed it out again in sluggish vapour. A tract of rushes glimmered, for each long, sword-shaped leaf was edged with a thread of crimson. One of the larger pools of almost unbroken surface not only reflected the burning sky, but the gruesome, pointing finger of the rock which plunged through breathless water. On her right, the land sloped upwards and was forested with misshapen trees. Although their outermost branches were still lit, the violence of the sunset was failing, and the light was crumbling momentarily from the boughs. Keda's shadow stretched to her right, growing as she proceeded, less and less intense as the raddled ground dulled from a reddish tint to a nondescript ochre, and then from ochre to a warm grey, which moment by moment grew more chill until she found herself moving down a tract of ash-grey light. For the last 2 days the great shoulder of hill, with the dreadful monotony of its squat, fibrous trees which covered it, had lain on Keda's right hand, breathing, as it were, over her shoulder, groping for her with stunted arms. It seemed that for all her life the oppressive presence of trees, of stultified trees, had been with her, leering at her, breathing over her right shoulder, each one gesticulating with its hairy hands, each one with a peculiar menace of its own, and yet every one monotonously the same in the endlessness of her journey. For the monotony began to have the quality of a dream, both uneventful and yet terrifying, and it seemed that her body and her brain were flanked by a wall of growth that would never end. But the last 2 days had at least opened up to her the wintry flats upon her left, where for so long her eyes had been arrested and wearied by a canyon face of herbless rock, upon whose high grey surface the only sign of life had been when an occasional ledge afforded purchase for the carrion crow. But Keda, stumbling exhaustedly in the ravine, had no thought for them as they peered at her, following her with their eyes, their naked necks protruding from the level of their scraggy bellies, their shoulders hunched above their heads, their murderous claws curled about their scant supports. Snow had lain before her like a long grey carpet, for the winter sun was never to be seen from that canyon's track, and when at last the path had veered to the right, and the daylight had rushed in upon her, she had stumbled forward for a few paces and dropped upon her knees in a kind of thanksgiving. As she raised her head, the blonde light had been like a benison. But she was indescribably weary, dropping her aching feet before her as she continued on her way without knowledge of what she was doing. Her hair fell across her face raggedly, her heavy cloak was flecked with mud and matted with burrs and clinging brambles. Her right hand clung on mechanically to a strap over her shoulder which supported a satchel, now empty of food, but weighted with a stranger cargo. Before she had left the mud-dwellings on the night when her lovers had killed each other beneath the all-seeing circle of that never-to-be-forgotten spawning moon, she had, as in a trance, found her way back to her dwelling, collected together what food she could find, and then, like a somnambulist, made her way first to Bragan's and then to Rantall's workshop, and taken from each a small carving. Then, moving out into the emptiness of the morning 3 hours before the dawn, she had walked, her brain dilated with a blank and zoneless pain, until, as the dawn like a wound in the sky welled into her consciousness, she fell among the salt grasses where the meres began, and with the carvings in her arms, slept unseen throughout a day of sunshine. That was very long ago. How long ago? Keda had lost all sense of time. She had journeyed through many regions, had received her meals from many hands in return for many kinds of labor. For a long while she tended the flocks of one whose shepherd had been taken ill with cold fever and had died with a lamb in his arms. She had worked on a long barge with a woman who, at night, would mew like an otter as she swam among the reeds. She had woven the hazel hurdles and had made great nets for the freshwater fish. She had moved from province to province. But a weariness had come, and the sickness at dawn, and yet she was forced to be continually moving, but always with her were her burning trophies, her white eagle, her yellow stag. And now it was beyond her strength to work, and a power she did not question was inexorably driving her back towards the dwellings. Under the high, ragged, and horrible bosom of the hill, she stumbled on. All colour was stifled from the sky, and the profane finger of rock was no longer visible, save as a narrow hint of dark on dark. The sunset had flamed and faded, every moment seeming permanent, and yet the crumbling from crimson to ash had taken no longer than a few demoniac moments. Keda was now walking through darkness, all but the few yards immediately in front of her feet obscured. She knew that she must sleep, that what strength remained in her was fast ebbing, and it was not because she was unused to spending the night hours alone among unfriendly shapes that she was stayed from coiling herself at the foot of the hill. The last few nights had been pain, for there was no mercy in the air that pressed its frozen hands to her body, but it was not for this reason that her feet still fell heavily before her, one after the other, the forward tilt of her body forcing them onwards. It was not even that the trees that sucked at her right shoulder had filled her with horror, for now she was too tired for her imagination to fill her mind with the macabre. She moved on because a voice had spoken to her that morning as she walked. She had not realized that it was her own voice crying out to her, for she was too exhausted to know that her lips were giving vent to the occult. She had turned, for the voice had seemed to be immediately beside her. "Do not stop," it had said. "Not tonight, for you shall have a roof of reeds." Startled, she had continued for not more than a few paces when the voice within her said, "The old man, Keda, the old brown man. You must not stay your feet." She had not been frightened, for the reality of the supernatural was taken for granted among the dwellers. And as she staggered 10 hours later through the night, the words wavered in her mind, and when a torch flared suddenly in the road ahead of her, scattering its red embers, she moaned with exhaustion and relief to have been found, and fell forward into the arms of the brown father. What happened to her from that moment she did not know, but when she awoke, she was lying upon a mattress of pine needles, smelling of a hot, dry sweetness, and around her were the wooden walls of a cabin. For a moment she did not lift her eyes, although the words which she had heard upon the road were in her ears, for she knew what she would see. And when she at last lifted her head to see the thatching of the river reeds above her, she remembered the old man, and her eyes turned to a door in the wall. It opened softly as she lay, half drowsed with the perfume of the pine, and she saw a figure. It was as though autumn was standing beside her, or an oak, heavy with its crisp, tenacious leaves. He was of brown, but lambent, as of sepia-black glass held before a flame. His shaggy hair and beard were like pampas grass, his skin the colour of sand, his clothes festooned about him like foliage along a hanging branch. All was brown, a symphony of brown, a brown tree, a brown landscape, a brown man. He came across the room to her, his naked feet making no sound upon the earth of the cabin floor, where the creepers sent green tributaries questing. Keda raised herself upon her elbow. The rough summit of the oak tree moved, and then one of its branches motioned her back so that she lay still again upon the pine needles. Peace like a cloud enveloped her as she gazed at him, and she knew that she was in the presence of a strange selflessness. He left her side, and, moving across the earth floor with that slow, drifting tread, unfastened some shutters, and the rayless light of the north sky poured through a square window. He left the room, and she lay quietly, her mind becoming clearer as the minutes passed. The trestle bed that she lay upon was wide and low, being raised only a foot from the ground by 2 logs which supported the long planks. Her tired body seemed to float with every muscle relaxed among the billowing needles. Even the pain in her feet, the bruises she had sustained in her wanderings were floating, a kind of floating pain, impersonal and almost pleasurable. Across her the brown father had spread 3 rough blankets, and her right hand, moving under them as though to test the pleasure of moving itself independently from the tired mass of her body, struck upon something hard. She was too weary to wonder what it was, but some time later she drew it forth. The white eagle. "Braygun," she murmured, and with the word 100 haunting thoughts returned. Again she felt about her and found the wooden stag. She brought them against her warm sides, and after the pain of memory a new emotion, kindred to that which she had felt on the night she had lain with Rantel, suffused her, and her heart, faintly at first, and then more loud and louder still, began to sing like a wild bird. And though her body heaved suddenly with sickness, the wild bird went on singing.